Good morning, party people, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. I know we were talking about the Ferrari driving video that's going through the Valley of Fire State Park in Las Vegas. Every now and then, folks will say, hey, why don't you post those on your... I actually do post them on my personal YouTube channel. If you search for Brento's Our YouTube, there are videos on there from time to time from vacations. I will warn you that they're mostly boring, and most of the time I don't have the music on those either, because I listen to copyrighted music, of course, all the time. That'll get me into strikes with YouTube and Twitch and all that if I try to play copyrighted music on the stream. So good morning. See G. Surgeon, Surly Deb, Michael J. Swart. We got people from all over the place in here. Default blame acceptor. There are a ton of interesting questions in PollGab. If you want to ask a question, go to pollgab.com/room/Brent, the link down there. And the first one is, hi Brent, have you seen anybody put good visualizations on top of SP Blitz? I'm trying to build something in Power BI and I'm looking for inspiration. Okay, so those of you who've been around for a while will remember that I actually did that. I did something with the First Responder Kit Power BI dashboard, and I ended up discontinuing it because I had so many people asking support questions on Power BI, like how do I make this work in Power BI? How do I make that work? I don't want to teach Power BI, and I don't want to be in the Power BI support business, so I ended up deprecating that. I cut my finger. I have seen a lot of blood. I've seen a lot of inspiring visualizations for First Responder Kit, but the place that I've seen them from is consulting companies that build them for their clients. I've seen a lot of consulting companies who go, hey, Brent, check this out. We build this for our clients, and we do it as a value add to show them what's going on their server. I had one of them last week email me and said, here's an automatic health check that I built on top of SP Blitz. Has all kinds of pretty graphs and stuff. You can understand why consulting companies don't want to share that publicly, of course, because they see that as their advantage. But just know that there are a lot of people out there doing it, which I find really cool. And making money on it, which I also find cool. Next one comes from Pradeep, who says, I'm a dev database administrator, and I use setstats.io to reduce the number of logical reads, but my production DBA says I only care about reducing physical reads. So he says, what are your thoughts? Let's say, and I'm going to get stacks of paper out because I always like to use for my how to think like the engine pages. Let's say that you're continuously scanning pages over and over and they're in memory. Well, they're taking up memory because SQL Server will cache whichever pages you read the most often. So if you tune those queries so that they do nice, tidy index seeks, that means that SQL Server won't have to cache the entire table in memory and will just be able to grab tiny portions of the table. That means more memory is freed up for other queries. So what I find over and over again when I do index tuning and query tuning based on high logical reads is it has this incredible cascading effect. You tune the top query, everything gets faster all the way down just because now SQL Server has more memory available to cache stuff for other queries and use as query workspace as well. Good morning, GuaroNet. Next up we have, let's see here. So next up, MancDBA says, I don't know if that's Manchester or what, says, hi Brent, how dedicated were you when it came to getting better knowledge about SQL Server? Did you study at the weekends or evenings, or did you get enough knowledge through the working week? So depending on where you're at in your career, through the course of your career, you're going to have different amounts of time available to you. Sometimes you're going to have family commitments. Sometimes you're going to have health issues. And those things outside of your control will sometimes dictate how much time you get to spend on things that you love. In some parts of my life, I have spent 12 hours a day either working or learning about my work, sharpening my knives. In other parts of my day or in other parts of my career, I've only worked like 3 or 4 hours a day at most, barely treading water, trying to keep up because I had things going on in my personal life. So it's been both, because also I'm old and I've been around here for a while. Alexander says, hi, Brent. First time here, lurking on your site and YouTube for a long time as a beginner. Lots of things are way above my level, but I always enjoy the content. That's, of course, how you learn, is you get challenged by stuff that's outside of your comfort zone. And that kind of ties in with this question, too. There have been periods in my life where I've even said, I just want to go sit with another employee, go sit and watch what they do, because I had enough time. Where I would say to one of the sysadmins back when I was working at Southern Wine and Spirits, especially the network admins, I'd say, hey, I know you're going to do an outage this Saturday, and it's not really related to my job, but I'd like to just watch you do it and see what happens. I promise not to bother you or ask too many questions. I just want to see what you have to deal with when you go to, say, for example, upgrade a core network switch. You know, how much work is involved with that. And I liked it for, like learning for personal experimentation was fun. The Net Demoter asks, when would you not enable Query Store for SQL Server? I teach you that in my classes on mastering server tuning and in mastering parameter sniffing. So if you attend either of those classes, mastering server tuning, parameter sniffing, I talk about how plan cache parameterization works, how we struggle with those things, and give you demo queries that you can run on your server to see when your server is likely to have problems if you turn on Query Store. I wish I could explain it faster, but that's one of those where I have to give you demos to do it, and that's why it's inside a training class. DK Kimbo says, if you're on SQL Server 2005, you should probably learn leave Query Store off. I would go further, and I would even say if you're on 2016 or 2017, you should probably, in most circumstances, leave it off, because performance gets so much better in newer versions of SQL Server. It's not that you can't turn it on with earlier versions, just that you feel the overhead a lot more. Next up, Venkat asks, what is your opinion of the new query anti-pattern extended event in SQL Server 2022? I think it's almost useless. Because it catches so few anti-patterns. It was just like this token of, here you go. And then we're not probably, knowing what I know about how Microsoft works, we are probably not going to see any more anti-patterns added until the next version of SQL Server or even later. So if you look at how little it catches, and I'll be back to you in 2 years. I'm like, I think you could do better than that. What instead I would focus on is look at what your longest running queries, your most CPU intensive queries, your read intensive queries, and look at what anti-patterns they have. That'll make a much bigger bang for the buck performance difference. I hope that they continue to improve that. Extend events has been one of those features where they have gradually made more and more down payments in order to improve how the experience of how the feature works. So maybe they will improve it over the next however many years. Speaking of which, we do have a poll open for when's the next release date of SQL Server, and I haven't looked in there for a while to see what the responses were. I'd be curious to see what y'all think, what year the next version of SQL Server will come out in. Part of me says that it's not going to come out until at least 2024, because we're already halfway through 2023. Nobody's even made any noise about private releases for the next version. There are still all kinds of things that are broken in it in 2022. So I think it's probably going to be 2024 before we see the next release. I could probably start a prediction in Twitch. I've never actually done this before. Let's see if I can. There's manage prediction. When will the next version of SQL Server go out? I have to next version of. We'll just say MS SQL go out. And I'll say 2023, 2024, 2025, or later. And we'll give y'all 30 seconds. Got it. Okay, so we'll give you 30 seconds. Oh, Surly Dev says it's not a prediction I want. It's a poll. Oh, that probably makes sense. And unfortunately, I did a prediction, but there we go. I think I think you get the ability to do bet your channel points on here. It's a feature that I haven't used. I use it all the time as a viewer. Like I love watching Spooky Loops do polls. I was just watching his stream last night live and betting my channel points on there one way or another. So let's see. He says you don't know the proper answer yet. Exactly. Let's see what happens with where is manage the prediction. So, there were 100% of the votes. 100% of the votes came in as 2025. Oh, that's interesting. Or 100% of the prediction ones. Now, just because I like to award points, I'm just going to go ahead and say choose outcome 2025 so that anybody who bet their points on there gets to win free points. Woohoo! Yeah, Frag King says the query bucks. Yeah, exactly. You earn query bucks the longer that you watch the channel, and I can do like giveaways and stuff. I haven't done that often enough. I need to do that more. Next up, let's see here. Lakshmi asks, do you have any good use cases for temporary stored procedures? Yes. I have been, as a consultant, I have been stuck in environments where people say, you can't put any code on the server, you can't install anything, you don't have permissions to do anything. And anybody can create stored procedures in temp DB, like temp stored procedures, and sometimes, depending on how they set things, even real stored procedures, but temp stored procedures for sure. So I've been able to create like the diagnostic stored procedures like SP Blitz, SP Who is Active, etc., as temp stored procedures in order to get my work done. Oh, G Surgeon says, I wish I could redeem 1,000 query bucks for one sad trombone sound. I should work on that for the next webcast. Like, I don't have anything urgent that I have to do today after the webcast. I might end up playing around with that. I also have a voice changer. I have a voice changer app that's working beautifully. I haven't put it in on the stream yet, but I need to play around with that. Drew Kill asks if the video's frozen. No, it looks like it's working okay. And I'm not dropping any frames, so you may just need to reset there. All right, next up, let's see. Hold on a second here. Take a sip of my tasty beverage. Let's see here. Next up, Deepak asks a query, a terrible question. It's not terrible. Deepak, it's not your fault. It's not a terrible question on your behalf, but do you think the ChatGPT will result in the rebirth of English query for SQL Server? I will go down on record as saying that the next version of SQL Server will have some kind of ChatGPT integration built in, and it's going to be terrible. I think it's going to be so bad because Microsoft for the last like 10 years has had this policy where they want to latch their name onto everything even remotely buzzworthy. Like, for example, hey, I hear you like blockchain. We've added blockchain to your SQL server so you could chain the blocks while you SQL the server. And I'm like, what are you doing? Hey, we hear you like Java. We made it so you can put Java stored procedures in your database. Everybody knows Java's fast. Well, but nobody's doing that? Okay. Hey, everybody, we hear you like machine learning. We made the machine learn so you can... They just keep doing this, and then like in the next version, you find out that there's like no more investments inside that thing. Big data clusters was like the next... We got Kubernetes. You guys said you like Kubernetes. But of course, because it takes a long time to make these technology bets, by the time that the technology's already faded away, Microsoft releases the product and then it's kind of bored. Or kind of boring. So I really do think that ChatGPT will come out in the next or two versions in SQL Server. It's going to be terrible and we'll all have moved on to something else. So DK Kimbo says, hey everyone, we heard you don't like database diagrams. Too bad you have to have them for the next 100 years and accidentally click on them. CKI says, what tool do you recommend to check a database for SQL injection vulnerability? It's not the database that's vulnerable, it's the queries that are vulnerable. So queries that are vulnerable to SQL injection could be in stored procedures, they could be in linked server queries, they could be in dynamic SQL, they could be in queries that are built by C#, they could be anywhere, so you can't check the database, unfortunately. Any tool that does purport to check the database isn't going to get you full coverage. So unfortunately, no dice there. Next up, we have Bruce Unmighty, who asks a question that I don't have a really good answer for. He says, does the SSMS execution time in the lower right include the time required to render the results grid? So here's the thing. When you start executing a query, SQL Server doesn't consider it done on the server side until the last row has been delivered to the client. So if SSMS was rendering it row by row and not accepting the next row from the SQL Server until that row had finished been rendering, then it would include the time. But if SSMS said, give me all the data, and then it started rendering in a separate thread, then it might not include the time. You would see SQL Server considering it done while SSMS was still rendering. I don't have a good answer for that. Frankly, I wouldn't care. If you're bringing so much data back that the rendering time in SSMS is significant, you probably want to stop bringing so much back or stop complaining that it takes time. Try selecting less rows or less columns. I know it's not a sexy thing to say, but there it is. Another one that's really tricky, Dipesh asks, how do you know when SSMS plan operator times are individual versus cumulative? Oh, this is such a good question because it changes in versions. There was like a service pack or a version where it changed and where the batch execution plans changed as well. So it's different depending on whether it's a row mode execution plan, a batch mode execution plan, and what version of SQL Server you're on. I'm not a smart man. So all I do is I run my finger over the plan and I look at the times and I just kind of guess. Like you can tell if the numbers keep getting larger as you move across, then it's probably cumulative. But if all the operators going across are like 3 seconds and then all of a sudden the next one is like 0.1 second, you can pretty well guarantee that that one's not cumulative. And it can be different based on the operator too, as bad as that sucks. God. Next up, Maxim says, how do you deal with transaction log larger than the data file situation when we're dealing with an AG cluster with synchronous replicas? Me personally, I haven't had to deal with that in years. Like AGs came out in 2012 and I stopped managing them in like 2016. These days when clients call me, it tends to be on larger databases. Like I'm going to say it's fairly unusual that I get calls for stuff under like 100 gigabytes in size. And most of the time when you get those kinds of warnings, it's under 100 gigabytes in size. So I don't remember offhand whether you have to shrink on the primary and then fail over to the secondary and shrink there as well. I think there was a time in my life where I did have to do that, and that's vaguely what I remember. So what I would say is the next time if you shrink on the primary and the secondary doesn't shrink, wait till your next patching window, because of course your patches come out like every 30 days this time of year. Fail over to the secondary, and while it's active and you're patching the other one, go shrink that other one as well, and that may do the trick. Next up, Parminder asks, is there value in learning Power BI for the SQL DBA? Let me change the question. Is there value in learning Excel for the SQL DBA? Is there value in learning anything for a SQL DBA? No, we're all stupid. I mean, yes, there's value in learning any tool. I know some DBAs who learn C#. I know some who learn Java. I know some who learn PowerShell. I know some who learned R or Python. It just all comes down to what's going to make you in your shop more effective. And the people that you're surrounded by and the challenges that you're facing, what's going to make you more effective at delivering those needs in your environment. And I can't tell you what your environment is. I can tell you that Power BI has helped me, but I didn't even learn it well enough to the point where I could answer a question from somebody else. I just used it to build a couple of reports. It's pretty straightforward. If you use Excel, you can use Power BI. I wouldn't learn Power BI for the sake of learning Power BI. I would only learn it to solve a problem that I was facing. So it comes down to what are the problems that you're trying to solve. Most of the time, whatever you might need Power BI for, you could use Excel for and accomplish the same goal, unless you step out of the DBA role. If you want to start designing dashboards for people, for example, that's not what a database administrator does. But if that's what the career path that you want to take is, by all means, go learn Power BI. Next up, Deepak has another interesting. Oh, DK Kimbo says Paul Turley is a great resource if you're looking for Power BI. So if you're looking for Power BI, there are two places that I would start. One is Paul Turley's. It wouldn't be the first place that I would look, but his is good as well. The first place I would look is Guy in a Cube. Guy in a Cube's YouTube channel is phenomenal. They have so many tips and tricks. They do live streams all the time too as well and answer your questions. It's a really good setup. And they have classes too as well. Oh, there's another one, and it's going to drive me crazy that I don't know it. Is it SQLblog.bi? BI. Let me see, where is it? Oh, I'm not going to find it now, and it's going to drive me crazy. They're from Europe, and they're really, really smart. Hopefully somebody in chat knows it. Yeah, Alpha Kraus says SQL BI. Is it SQLBI.blog? What is their website? Because I subscribe to it, but I don't know what it is. I subscribe to it, but I just have it in my Feedly list of feeds, so I don't know what the actual name of the website is. I'm terrible. Deepak asks, what Azure SQL DB features do you think we can expect to flow down to traditional SQL Server? Okay, there's a myth out there that Azure SQL DB is the next version of SQL Server. That's simply not true. There are features that work in SQL Server 2022 that are not available up in the cloud, and vice versa. So there are features up there, but the features that are up there that aren't in the box product, they're not really doable in the box product. And I'll give you an example. Automatic index tuning. Everybody thinks automatic index tuning would be really easy to do, but the thing is, you have to track missing index recommendations over time. You have to implement them. You have to measure whether they got better or worse. And then you have to be able to roll them back if necessary. Well, the way that Microsoft does it up in the cloud is they replay your workload. They'll actually create the index, replay the workload, and see whether things get better or worse. On premises, you don't have space to do that. On premises, you may not have a box where you can go restore, and you may not have a whole machinery that'll go through and replay your workload and measure whether things got better or worse. The way that they built that feature fundamentally doesn't work in the on-premises part of the product. I would love automatic index tuning. A, I would love it to do a great job in Azure SQL DB, and B, I would love for that to flow down to the box product, because I think it does a better job than not having a DBA. If you don't have any DBAs at all, then that's a better alternative than never creating indexes whatsoever. And for a lot of people, it's fine. You know, we constantly make fun of Clippy, the missing index recommendations, but you know, there are shops out there where even if all they did was implement the Clippy's indexes, they'd probably be better off than they were today. It's just the problem is you have to measure it and make sure things actually got better. So that would be really cool if we had it down on premises. I just don't think it'll ever come. Dr. Zaius says, hi Brent, have you ever used Adam Machanic's top max bigint technique? One of these days I got to memorize that number. I never memorize the max bigint number. As an alternative to the X-acto method of using temp tables to phase query execution? Yes. And in one of the classes, I can't remember if it's mastering parameter sniffing or mastering query tuning, I demo it. I show it, and I show in the case that I use it for in that class, it actually makes performance worse instead of better. That's not universal, of course. There are times when it'll work better. There are times when it'll work worse. But I do demo that in either mastering parameter sniffing or mastering query tuning. Next up, Yousef asks, what is your opinion of optimize for sequential key in SQL Server 2019? Oh, I'm going to get in trouble for this. How do you know you need it? What's the metric that you watch to tell that you need it? And that's the thing where I always, if Microsoft doesn't have an answer for that, I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know? Well, just ask your doctor. No, Microsoft, you're the doctor. You give me a number I can watch to tell when this feature is right for me. Like, you should just try it. I'm not really a big fan of just try it solutions. Now, I have not heard anything bad whatsoever about Optimize for Sequential Key. I have seen demos where it made artificial workloads faster, like people were doing 10,000 inserts per second sustained onto the same table, and it made a difference there. I don't have a lot of shops that do 10,000 inserts per second into the same table sustained. So I don't have a problem if people want to use it. It's totally fine with me. I just also am like, how do you measure that it made things better other than insert more rows per second? Because most of us don't measure that metric in production, and it doesn't really matter anyway because we have varying workloads because user workload comes and goes. So let's see. Next up, Eli says, hi, Brent, do you have a rule of thumb that teaches about the smallest table you'll index? No. I have put indexes on tables with just one row. Because here's the thing. When SQL Server takes the contents of that table, it joins it to other tables because you're going to use it in joins as your queries run. And if that data isn't sorted in a way that helps the join, then SQL Server has to sort that data every time. And even if there's only one row, SQL Server will put a sort operator into the plan because it can't guarantee that there's only one row. SQL Server has a hunch that it's a small table because that's what statistics are, but statistics aren't guaranteed. So SQL Server will inject that sort operator into the plan just to be safe because the amount of data in the table might change. So I have even seen benefits with just one row. Now, there is a threshold in SP Blitz Index. I want to say our default threshold is 100 megabytes. Don't quote me on that one, but you can look at SP Blitz Index and see the parameters on it. There's a threshold MB. I think it's 100 megabytes, but I've gone down lower than that at customer environments. Mars asks, would you recommend the first responder kit for benchmarking? Not really. So there are parts of it. SP Blitz first, I guess. If you want to log SP Blitz first to a table, that's good for benchmarking, and I show you how to do that and how I use the first responder kit class. Normally when people say first responder kit, my first thought is SP Blitz, and that's not really useful for benchmarking, but SP Blitz first is. And I teach you how to do it in that class. Michael J. Swartz says, we saw a use case for optimize for sequential workloads during an insane amount of workload once. It's unlikely to be relevant to most other folks. The symptom we were addressing was page latch waits. And Michael J. Swartz is in one of those situations where it is a sustained workload of 10,000 inserts per second into a single table or higher. And I say this as if I've worked with Michael J. Swartz. I have not. I only know because I read his excellent blog, michaeljswart.com. But he has had blog posts talking about, for example, how unusual use cases for table variables and in-memory table variables also helped out at that kind of scale when you're dealing with 10,000 queries a second. And Michael J. Swartz says, I feel like we've worked together. I feel like we've worked together because I read everything that comes out in the blog. I'm like, let me bookmark that for later. Let me read that like 3 times too to make sure I get that right. And we'll do one more. Let's see here. We'll go. Oh, Neil asks, Hi, Brent. Is there a? Oh, there are a couple of new questions that came in too. I'll answer those that came in from the live viewers. So Neil says, is there a way to max stop someone's troublesome query like a third-party app dashboard, like max stop for a specific sproc? Yes, resource governor. If you're using Enterprise Edition, you can cap how much CPU and how much memory a query gets. So you can play around with Resource Governor in Enterprise Edition. Works fantastic. Another thing you could do is even in Standard Edition is you can set max stop at the database level. So you can set up, this is going to sound kind of convoluted, that third-party application dashboard, give them their own login, map that login to a specific default database, and see if it stays in that database. Because what some third-party dashboards will do is they will, and all kinds of third-party apps, they will fully qualify their queries. They'll say, I'm looking for data from database name, table name, database name, schema name, table name. If they stay in the default database that you want and they don't jump over to another database with a use, then you can set max stop at the database level and it'll take effect to just their login there, which is kind of spiffy. DK Kimbo points out, and this is a good point too, you can do this with Query Store as well. Starting with SQL Server 2022, we got a set hints option for specific plans. Now, of course, this is only to specific plans, so that third-party dashboard, you're going to need to find its queries in Query Store, and then you can add a hint to that. That is a really cool idea. I like that, DK Kimbo. I like that a lot. Especially since the Neil said one query, so it's less likely that he's going to have to constantly play whack-a-mole finding different queries. That's pretty good. The new query, or the new question that came out, Guaro says, hi, Brent, how are you? I'm good. I'm quite good. Except for the fact that I'm texting back and forth with my my backyard renovation contractor as we speak, and they just tried to tell me that something wasn't included in the contract, and I had to bust out the contract and point at it and say, you see this part right here where it says you're going to redo my front lawn? Yes, that's the part you're not going to pay me for. You're going to do that now. They're not happy about that, and I'm not happy that I had to remind them. I think since we signed that contract a year ago, they forgot about how much it was. The amount of money they're losing on this project never seems to end. It's their problem, not mine. Although it's mine because it's taking forever. Guaro asks, is the first responder kit working fine in SQL Server 2022? Yes, as far as I know, I haven't heard any complaints about it. I haven't built anything into it to use new features in SQL Server 2022 because 22 adoption is so crazy low, especially with all the problems that we've hit in the first 4 cumulative updates. But as far as I know, it works fine in there. And there was one other that came in during the webcast. Eduardo asked, when I'm running SP Blitz first, should it be run on the DAC connection? No. DAC should always be your last resort. Don't log into the DAC unless there's no other way that you can get the SQL Server to respond, because only one session from one person can run on the DAC at a time. If someone gets in the habit of leaving a connection open to the DAC and an emergency strikes, you won't be able to get into the server and do emergency troubleshooting. You'll be like, who's using the DAC? So stay out of there. Default Blame Acceptor points out, make sure that your DAC is working. I would agree with that, but then don't ever use it again. Should be stopped from there. All right, so a slew of questions. Wow, we went for like 40-some minutes there, all nonstop. A lot of good questions inside that batch. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will see y'all tomorrow. I am debating whether or not I stream me playing Dead by Daylight tomorrow morning. I have put together a bunch of gear in the goal of, I'm just grabbing this because it happened to be on my office desk. I'm putting together all kinds of gear so that I could stream Dead by Daylight from my home theater. I have a PlayStation 5 that I usually play DVD on, and I have a gaming PC in there that I could use for the stream. We'll see whether or not that works. I'll play with that probably this afternoon and see. But so if I don't do a technical stream tomorrow, that'll be what I'm doing, is getting slaughtered by killers, or I'm probably doing some killer as well. That's not going to be a regular part of my life. It's just every now and then. I play Dead by Daylight a lot. I play like 1 to 3 hours a day. And so I thought it'd be fun for people to see how bad I suck at it, but it's still a ton of fun. All right, so I'll see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.